I'd like to start with telling you a story about someone that I know very well. For most of his life, he didn't want anyone to know that he was struggling on the inside with mental health challenges. He had promised himself that he would never tell anyone about the pain that he had endured in his life growing up. From childhood sexual abuse, along with emotional and physical abuse, being diagnosed with PTSD, OCD, and general anxiety disorder, growing up in a family with alcohol addiction and domestic violence, extreme bullying in school and at home, and reoccurring thoughts of suicide, and the list goes on. The reason that I know so much about him is because that's my story. It's me. I thought I would never tell anyone about my story, and yet here I am tonight, knowing that the stigma around mental health that kept me living with secrets growing up must be brought into the light, allowing me and others to continue to heal. My hope is that by sharing my story, it will allow others in our community to know it is okay to ask for help. Your story may look nothing like mine, and the fact is nobody looks like their story. They are all personal, and they are all unique. Some are hard to tell, and some are hard to hear, but there is incredible power in all of our stories. I once heard someone say that when we spend time with our secrets, we are lonely because our hearts and our mind are full of secrets. But when we let those secrets out, there is more room for love, more room for joy, and more room for peace. And now I'd like to tell you about my journey to wellness out of the shadows in corporate America. In 2009, I realized that I was giving most of my life's energy to Dow. Climbing the corporate ladder and trying to present this image to the world of a guy who's got it all together. However, I was once again beginning to experience a lot of emotional pain. Well, later that year, I got a new job at Dow and began meeting with community nonprofits that we partnered with. And I'd like to tell you about one of those meetings. It was an early morning, and I leave the Dow office, and I drive a few miles outside the city of Midland. I get out of my car, and I begin a slow walk up a long driveway to a big house with very large pillars. I was sweating, and I was having a really hard time breathing. I walk into the waiting room to sit down, and I wait for the executive director, who's here tonight, Sharon Mortensen. My legs were shaking, and I was doing everything possible not to run out of the building. I actually thought about running out of here a few minutes ago, but I'm going to stay. This building that I went to was Shelter House, an agency that is committed to providing support, shelter, and counseling to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. The director takes me for a tour of the building. Thank you, Sharon. You see, what the director didn't know that day, and what I was not able to tell her that day, was that 12 years prior, in 1998, at the age of 36, I had gone to Shelter House for counseling because I needed help in dealing with the sexual trauma that I had endured as a kid. The pain from that trauma affected me so profoundly that I had considered suicide during my teen and early adult years and really didn't understand why. The pain, the flashbacks, the fear, the sadness, the anxiety, and the shame were hounding me. I could be in a room with the people who mattered the most in my life, or in a room with 1,000 people, and still feel completely alone. No one at these stages of my life would have probably ever thought that I was in so much pain. I learned from a very young age to hide it from everyone, including myself, even when life was collapsing all around me. Counseling at Shelter House in 1998 gave me another chance at life, to tell others about my pain, to release it, to gain peace, and begin to heal. After taking that tour of Shelter House, that time for my job, I realized I had more memories from my childhood that required more healing and time to process. I started looking for another therapist and possibly some support groups that could help me in the next phase of my recovery. I have learned that recovery is an ongoing journey and not a one-and-done experience. So as I was advancing in my career and getting more and more responsibilities, I wanted to go to counseling as far away from Midland as possible so that I didn't run into anyone that I knew. Stigma followed me everywhere. I became more concerned about who knew I was seeking help. I drove 120 miles one way weekly to Detroit for individual and group therapy for male survivors of sexual abuse. Well, as God would have it, while in Detroit during group therapy, I ironically met one of the most courageous men from Midland that has continued to walk on this journey with me for the past 13 years. I once again am reminded that human connection drives wellness. In 2018, after years of intense and ongoing therapy and recovery, I was ready to talk more publicly about my story. The intersection of my corporate life and my healing began as I volunteered to share my story publicly at a Dow Inclusion Conference in Houston with a few 500 colleagues from 30 different countries. I walked on stage feeling like I was wearing a backpack full of rocks because after that experience, I realized that I had lifted that burden by telling my story. I removed many heavy rocks that day that I had been carrying around my entire life. The sharing of my story made it acceptable for others to open up. For 3.5 hours following the presentation, many employees stood in line to acknowledge their own stories, to offer thanks, and to share about the impact of their mental health challenges and trauma in their lives and their families' lives. Over the next 2 years, I was invited to share my story with thousands of other Dow employees and community members around the world. At the end of the day, I really believe my story is a story of hope, because in working through the pain, with counseling, connecting with other survivors, and unwavering support from my family and my friends, and with a strong faith in God, I have found joy, I have found peace, and I have found purpose. Let me tell you quickly what happens when passion meets purpose. After retiring from Dow at the end of 2019, I knew that my purpose was to take hope and recovery to as many people as possible. That's where mental health first aid comes in. I'm going to give you a scenario that we use in mental health first aid. If I walked into this room tonight and I was bleeding profusely out of my ear and my arm was broke, you all would know what to do. You'd probably say, I'm going to call 911. I'm going to apply pressure if I know first aid. I'm going to let you know that help is on the way, and I'm going to stay with you until help arrives. But very few of us would know exactly how to respond if we saw someone who was having a panic attack or showing signs of addiction. Mental health first aid teaches us how to identify, how to understand, and how to respond to signs of mental health and substance use challenge. And again, as I look back on my life, I recognize that the teachers, none of the counselors in the school, none of my family members or neighbors or relatives had those skills to help me navigate mine or my family's mental health challenges. What I'm most proud of with mental health first aid is that I've trained more than 200 faculty, staff, and students at SVSU, as well as employees from TriStar, from Morley, from Saginaw Chamber, and Wildfire Credit Union. And most recently, the Mental Health Partnership, and Matt had some photos up there, we went in and trained Three Rivers, Delta College, United Way of Midland County, and DRI Investments in Bay City. All over the past 3 years, I've been working also across the U.S. globally with the National Council for Mental Well-Being to more than 80 corporations, because people like Delta Airlines, Ford Motor Company, Bloomberg, Walmart, all of them are stepping forward and saying we need to address burnout and we need to address the mental health challenges our employees are struggling with. So our goal is to make mental health first aid as common as CPR. So let me close with a huge thank you to my heroes. My wife, Nancy, who has been an integral part of my healing journey during the last 39 years of marriage. My 4 adult kids and their spouses, and one that's here tonight, our youngest, Michael. Our kids have listened to my story and have brought great wisdom from their own journeys to help me, and together we help each other. My friends and family that have helped me navigate my recovery journey. My first trauma therapist at Shelter House, Yvonne. She inspired me to talk about my abuse and process the pain that I thought I would never tell anyone. To my trauma therapist in Midland, Jennifer Wearies, who I was, by the way, scared to death to go to Jennifer because her husband worked at Dow, and it was okay. Jennifer, over the years, taught me how to trust that inner voice and put words and feelings to the pain. And to my company, for Dow, for having an EAP, for having benefits that helped me with the cost of therapy, and to my mentors and my managers who allowed me to bring my whole self to work every day. And finally, to many people in this room and in our community that have been on my journey of recovery and have given me space to use my voice, a voice that with the right support moves from pain to hope to resilience and ultimately to helping others use their voice. Telling our stories frees others to tell their stories. Thank you for listening to my story.